Welcome to 52 Miniatures. My name is Alex. I've finally finished my scenic 6x4-foot gaming board. It's been a while since I started this, so let's start with a recap. My idea was to build a scenic wargaming board for an alternative World War I wargame called A War Transformed, featuring trenches and bunkers, all set on a former sea floor. Imagine the sea is pulled back. The old sea floor is now new battlegrounds. I chose to do a former shoreline, so we have a ridge or a hill in one end that is in fact the old shore, and then the majority of the board is the old seafloor. There's another rise, maybe a past island with a ruined building, an abandoned sanitarium connected to a cliff with a lighthouse. There's a stream running diagonally across the board, a road across the middle, two bunkers, and a series of trenches and small defensive positions. The board is predominantly built out of XPS foam. XPS foam is not only great for light landfill, the material itself has the benefit of being easy to carve and shape, even stamp or press details into. My trench and some scattered details are 3D printed. Other details are scratch-built from predominantly wood, like ice cream sticks and coffee stirrers. There's also quite a bit of plaster rock molds, cork bark and aluminium foil for cliffs and rock formations. The idea throughout has been to use as many different techniques to create a rich and living landscape. The major reason to build a dedicated, non-modular scenic board is, well, first off, I just want to build one. It's a cool project, I told myself. Secondly, as this board features trenches, it's great visually to be able to actually dig them down seamlessly into the ground. This is the state of the board right now. All major construction is complete. All loose bits, trenches and such are incorporated into the board, hiding joints with various texture pastes. Most that I've made myself from cheap acrylic paste, sand and fine sawdust. I think a creative, spiky trap building something of this magnitude is dug by the time everything takes. It's easy to take the shortcut, to make small micro-decisions based on saving time. Yet it's too many of these decisions that can make a board like this end up looking monotonous and, in my view, a little dull. I mean, there's a lot of space here, a chance to indulge. I don't mean things need to take a long time to get good. I just think we sometimes don't take the time to step back and look at what we're doing because there's stress to get things done. So I decided to analyze some different zones on this board and work out how to treat them differently, give different looks to various sections. I've gone over the XPS foam with black paint just to get rid of that horrible yellow color. It makes me think better not seeing all that yellow. But I'll say straight away that this layer of paint is a bad idea. The textures I'm about to add will in fact be glued to the paint and not to the foam. So what actually holds all the rubble to come in place is a thin layer of black paint instead of them actually being securely glued to the foam itself. We live and we learn. Okay, different zones. Over here we have an area that I imagine could be a sandy beach, a sort of wave pattern perhaps, almost like a desert dune tumbling down towards the trench. Over here is an area that could be a swamp, puddles, mud and growth. This middle section with the bunkers should be well trodden and barren, but I've pondered maybe a red clay vibe rather than the overused brown. There will be plenty of other spaces for brown on this board. Towards the sanitarium, I think maybe a bit more rubble and dust, as well as something green towards the edge. Edges are slightly uninteresting though. Not many games stay played at the edges of a board, so I flagged them as rather low priority. The river, I imagine, is a kind of cut through the bedrock, a grey stony stream cutting across the battlefield. So I want to add a variety of textures like texture pastes, rocks, sand and dust to create different environments and detail as well as cover previous floors. Working with a multiple-step workflow means creating the option to keep what you've done in the past that looks good and hide whatever looks bad with future steps. Let's start with the beach. I've got this beach sand texture paste. As it turns out, the paste does not magically create beach dunes. It's also not blessed with any sand texture whatsoever. Using wall filler would probably render a very similar result. I felt like I was kind of smearing whipped cream on the sides of a cake. And I know what many say, Sand on a miniature scale would not have visible grains, which is very true. But we're dealing with the subconscious here. When the eye does not see grain, it says, that's not sand, it's whipped cream. The best trick with this paste I found was to use the stuff thick, create a wave-like pattern, and then spray it with water. The water softens my shapes into something sand dune-like. Next up is a wet ground texture for the swamp. This is just to get that slushy vibe that will be, like the sand, a unique texture on the board. Again, this stuff works best in large blobs shaped into something ground-like, creating a variation of height and wet shapes in the swamp. The crackled paste was a bit of a disappointment. I didn't know this at the time, of course, but even though I applied this on a lot of varied surfaces with varying thickness, it in the end never ended up creating any majorly nice crackled surfaces. It was more like a crackled paint and not a paste. I was imagining thick, crusty things and just got small crackled blobs here and there. Finally, a regular earthy ground texture. This is to create track marks on the road, paths of muddy ground trodden down by muddy boots, and covering up any missed little details where seams in the foam show and such. Next day, once the pastes are dried, it's time for dry textures, rubble and sand and such. First off, the beach. The technique I'm going to use will be the same for the entire board, sprinkling on sand in this case, but without any glue underneath, adding the adhesive afterwards rather than before. This allows two things. After all the texture is added, I can push it into shape, so to speak, with dry brushes, pushing the stuff around to my liking. More importantly, we get the benefit of good old gravity. Stone and sand will tumble into natural formations, pile up where it naturally would pile up rather than stick to glue in unnatural formations. My dunes will be visible, but with a bit more of a rough, wet beach thing happening around them, all falling naturally because of gravity. To adhere the grains to the surface, I first spray with isopropyl alcohol. This reduces surface tension, allowing for the next spray of glue to pour all the way through the texture rather than float on top. I use scenic sealant from Geek Gaming Scenics as sprayed-on glue. When I ran out of this, I simply used watered-down white glue or PVA glue with some polyurethane varnish added to the mix. And so the same technique is used for loose gravel and rocks on the rest of the board. I apply the textures in order of size, starting with small stones, moving to smaller grained rubble mix, down to tile grout that will act almost like a dust, then sometimes a bit of tea leaf type textures. The order of application means I don't have weird piles of large rocks floating on top of finer and finer grain stuff. Instead, the finer grain stuff will settle around the larger stuff. Again, gravity does most of the work, as well as working it around with a brush, pushing everything into place. The stones are in a way somewhat symbolic, or little lies that make the big lie come together. It tells the eye this must be nature, as there's piles of stone all over the place. The stones create random natural formations that kind of covers up the fact that most of what we see is carved foam. I don't aim for a realistic board. This is fantasy-based wargaming, but most fantasy worlds are based on things we relate to, like rocks acting like rocks do. Unless there's magic, of course, but I'm not that experimental. What I'm avoiding is large flat spaces. This is not a diorama. It will have hands touching it, dice rolling over it, miniatures moved. Regardless of the amount of glue applied, a lone stone will inevitably be knocked off. So I concentrate on areas where larger piles can be created that in turn are glued to several sides around it, creating a solid mass that will be able to take quite the beating. Tile grout is great to create random earth-like textures. As it burns, so to speak, it cures on its own when water, or in this case glue, is sprayed on it and hardens into a very tough texture that still has a nice grainy look to it. Tile grout does, for the most, contain silica, and that is not great to inhale, so be careful with the dust. Soaking the board once will most likely not be enough to set all these stones and sand in place. 2 or 3 times is more like it. Also possibly dripping sealant into the very deep piles to make sure they're flooded. Each spray I did was first one with isopropyl alcohol, followed by the sealant, with a day or so in between applications. After I'm confident that most of this stuff is sealed in place, I brush off excess. There will always be loose stones. But I don't stop there. I actually go in and rub at the piles with my finger, rather forcefully. Anything that's not firmly locked in place needs to go. And this is when I noticed that some of the rocks came off not because they were not properly stuck, but because the black paint was the failing link. I'd created a barrier with the black paint, the rocks not actually glued to the foam, but the paint. No huge deal, but next time I'll definitely skip any layers of paint until the assembly of the board is complete. And I'm now ready to prime the board. It's been almost 2 years, but paint is finally going on. Now, foam is sensitive to some solvents and chemicals. Superglue, for example. Also regular rattle can spray paint. It melts the XPS foam. But I'm not going to try and airbrush prime all these 6x4 feet. The answer is water-based rattle can paint. This stuff takes longer to cure, goes on a bit thick, but for priming terrain it works fine. It also doesn't smell, so you're actually fine to use it indoors if you can control the dust. Something I won't be able to do, this piece is too large and too flat, so I brought everything outside. Dusk was approaching on the clouds, but I wanted to get paint on. I'm doing a zenithal prime, a black first followed by a dusting of white from above. This brings out details and gives me a representation of how natural light would hit the landscape, as well as a useful base for when working with transparent paints. The white rattle can really splatters. Nothing I would use for miniatures, but in this case it's not a big deal. In some areas it can even be a benefit as the splatter can look like natural colouring on a rock and so forth. Furthermore, as this water-based paint takes some time to dry, and I put the white right on after the black, the two paints mix together in places. Especially where the sand and grout texture is thick. Black paint still not dry contaminates the white, creating grey. This actually looks cool and gives a bonus pattern that I can work with, heading forward. Once everything was inside again and the paint is cured, I touched things up with some white in my airbrush. As I'd primed in darkness, there were spots I'd missed as well as some areas of too much splatter, like on the trenches and the bunkers, that I wanted to smooth out. And there we are. The table is primed and ready to paint. It looks great in a black and white, like an old aerial photograph over a battlefield. It gives me hope of great things to come, as well as slight fright over how much painting I'm set up for. To avoid one excessive mastodont video, I've divided this video into 2 excessive videos. The next video on painting is already released. Don't worry, you'll find it at the end, as well as down in the description. Here's what we will be aiming for in the following video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have the means, support future content like this by supporting my work on the channel over on Patreon. Any means of support really helps. See you in a few minutes.